All right, hello Verdict Plus. It's great to be with you today. We have a great conversation upcoming. As a reminder, if you become a subscriber on Verdict Plus, then you'll get all kinds of great content just like this on a regular basis. With me today is Senator Ted Cruz, of course. This is, of course, Verdict Plus is your namesake, and President of Students for Life, Kristan Hawkins. Thank you both for being here. This is great.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we have a lot of great things to talk about. A lot of things happening at the Supreme Court. Dobbs, of course. I mean, we're all waiting with bated breath here. I think today what would be really interesting is to talk about the philosophy of the fight and then the practicality and the legality of the fight. So, Senator, I want to ask you about Dobbs, but first I want to talk to Kristan about this battle plan that you've just released and how your new fight, or the new wave of the pro-life fight, is in a sense the ideological descendant of the founding. And this is a very nerdy, very philosophical, very, very compelling and interesting line of thinking. Can you explain this to us?
By the way, I've got to say that could describe this podcast. Very nerdy, very philosophical. What was it? Very something line of thinking?
Yes, it's very
we need
nitty-gritty.
That quote on a
There
t-shirt.
you go. There you go.
Very nerdy, very philosophical. Welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me. Yes, that's a great motto. Yes, we just released this new Final Fight for Freedom battle plan. You can download it, digest it on your own, studentsforlife.org/fight. But essentially is what we're talking about is, we're going to be hearing about abortion a lot in the news. If you already haven't been, you're going to be hearing about it more. And if you don't like to talk about abortion, I'm sorry, you're going to be talking about it. And it's going to continue to be an issue du jour. And when we talk about this issue of abortion, sometimes we often hear like the rhetoric of the left, your body, your choice. And we kind of delve into that, but it's why does this matter? Why is abortion wrong? It ends the life of a unique, whole, living human being. It wounds a mother, it ends a legacy of a family, but it violates these very core principles of our nation's founding. Our first fight for freedom was this revolutionary war to, win back our right to govern ourselves. And then we had the second fight for freedom for all Americans to become citizens, no matter their skin color. And in 1973, 7 men on the Supreme Court, Senator, 7 men handed down a decision which took away the freedom, the right to live for millions of preborn children. And really, it's created this fundamental disorder of the hierarchy of our rights in our country of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton being handed down in 1973, it said, no, your pursuit of happiness trumps another person's right to life. And it's created many of the problems that we see today, this dehumanization that goes on in so many battles across our country are being waged because we've gotten this wrong. And that's why we're calling it this final fight for freedom.
Which, Senator, I think is a really interesting way of looking at this, especially when we're looking at it from the standpoint of the legality of the thing. Yep. Because oftentimes pro-life activism, as you know, is about the ethics of the thing or the moral of the thing or even the science of the thing. But talk to me about Roe v. Wade in the nerdiest way possible here. Yes. Was it correctly or incorrectly decided, and exactly why?
Well, it was absolutely incorrectly decided. And what I like about what Kristan is doing and the work she's doing is that it's focused not just on the battle now, but on the next stage that we're getting ready to head to. The Dobbs decision, as we all know, is pending. I'm very optimistic about Dobbs. I think the odds are overwhelming that the Mississippi statute is going to be upheld. I think there are probably 6 votes to uphold that statute. And as we've talked about on this podcast, I am cautiously optimistic that the court will do what it should do and overrule Roe altogether. The argument went, frankly, better than I expected. I went in pretty pessimistic and was astonished that it seemed to me there were 5 solid votes to overturn Roe. I think Chief Justice Roberts is trying to find a middle ground to pull back from that, but I'm not sure he can shake off the other 5.
What would the middle ground be?
I think what Roberts is looking for is uphold the Mississippi statute, but don't overturn Roe. Find a way to do both.
Legally, how do you do that, though?
You make it up. But Roe made it up.
You come up with a new
in the history, in the tradition of Roe.
They would have to come up with a new threshold.
So look, Roe, if you look at our country, it was 1973 when this was decided. So we'd been around almost 200 years. In 200 years, nothing in the Constitution had ever said a word about abortion. For 200 years, it had been up to the states, and the states had laws regulating abortions. And if you disagreed with those laws, you went to the state legislature and you argued we should change the law. And actually in 1973, there were some states that were changing the laws. There were real and democratic debates, and people were having disagreements. And what the court did, 7 justices in Roe did, is said, you know, you pesky voters, you don't get to decide this. We know better than you. And the reasoning, so you think about, all right, well, what in the Constitution would make abortion a constitutional right? It doesn't provide for a constitutional right. The word abortion is nowhere in the Constitution. The majority opinion by Justice Blackmun it is actually, it's agreed by left and right. It's one of the worst Supreme Court opinions ever written. Blackmun, I'm trying not to speak ill, but was a thoroughly mediocre justice. And this was, it reads like legislation. So where did the court find the right to abortion? It found it in what was called the right to privacy. You say, oh, okay, well, what does the Constitution say about the right to privacy? Nothing. You look for the word privacy in the Constitution, it's not there. What the justices had said in preceding years, in earlier cases, the justices had created a right to privacy, and there are all sorts of rights. There's a Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure, so your home or your property can't be searched or seized. There are rights not to have soldiers forcibly quartered in your homes. That's the Third Amendment. There are a series of rights that protect aspects of privacy that are unquestionably part of the Constitution. What the Supreme Court had said before Roe, and it used really metaphysical language, it said these rights that are protected in the Bill of Rights, they have emanations. Basically, they glow. And those emanations cast penumbras. Now, penumbras, if you're not a law nerd, you may not know what a penumbra is.
I love how nerdy this is.
This is perfectly nerdy.
So penumbra is just a 10-penny word for shadow.
Right?
And, you know, we've got lights in the studio. They're shining lights, and they are casting penumbras of our brown leather chairs behind us. And what they said is, in the penumbras cast from the emanations, we find the right to privacy. Now, if that doesn't make any sense to you, that is because you actually are engaged in logic and reason, because they just made that up. And then, so you've got this right to privacy that's not in the Constitution. There are other rights that certainly are in the Constitution, but this broad, full-form right to privacy is mentioned nowhere in the Bill of Rights. Fast forward to Roe, they said within the right to privacy, we find the right to abortion. And with that, they declared the laws of states all over the country. They just threw them out and said you silly voters don't get to decide. And you know, short of the Civil War decisions and you know, major decisions on race in this country, I don't know that there's any decision that has caused more dissension in America, that has divided America. You know, look, one of the nice things about our democratic process is there's a safety valve. If we disagree on something, we have a way to sort it out. We can go fight it out. We can go argue. Kristen can come to your campus and argue with some leftist, and you can listen and decide. What the Supreme Court said is none of that. There is no safety valve. We know better than you. If Roe ends in the next couple of months, and I think there's a very real possibility it will, the answer will not be that abortion is suddenly illegal all over the country.
Right.
The answer will be it goes back to where it was before Roe, which means it's up to every state, and it will vary state by state. And that's where the work you're doing is so important, because this battle hopefully is fixing to go to the state legislatures in all 50 states.
That's exactly right.
And Kristen, this is really important too, because you might be one of the only organizations that's really pushing this as firmly as it needs to be, that's focusing on this in the way that it needs to be. A post-Roe America, for a lot of us, has seemed like, you know, not realistic or very far in the future.
Right.
Students for Life is planning what to do on a state-by-state basis for a post-Roe America, and specifically focusing, believe it or not on blue states where abortion would be legal, but on red states. Talk about this. This is very important.
And that's actually what keeps me up at night is, are we ready? You know, we've trained 130,000 young people. We have 1,300 chapters, and we've been sending them out to state legislatures. Texas, for example, we might as well just open an office in Austin next year during legislative session because they're there testifying and lobbying and advocating for laws. But it's the red states where we're going to have to make sure we have a trained and ready to go grassroots army, because you know you've got states like Mississippi and Arkansas that have passed very restrictive abortion bans. That's likely, when Roe's reversed, that they'll flat out make abortion illegal. They've never seen the full force of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry, you know, coming down to their state legislative races, their gubernatorial races, and that's exactly what's going to happen, because Planned Parenthood's not going to have to focus on California. Gavin Newsom is basically making California the abortion sanctuary state. They're paying for abortionists medical school bills now. They're going to be focusing on the red states. If you think your state is safe because you live in a conservative state, you've got another thing coming to you. That is exactly where the fight is going to be coming to you. And that's what we detail in this battle plan, because this is where we've got to get pro-lifers of all ages, of all backgrounds, engaged now to start talking to the representatives, start getting on the ground, talking to your neighbors about the resources, the tangible, non-violent resources that are already available in your community that, sadly, for the most part, Americans do not even know about.
So, Kristan, let me ask a different question. How did you personally come to leading Students for Life? What was your story that brought you to being a leading advocate?
I was raised in an evangelical church. I was looking for a volunteer opportunity.
Where are you from?
West Virginia.
West Virginia.
I have a little bit of slang, but not too much. Northern West Virginia. But a woman at my church was a part-time accountant at a pregnancy resource center. And I had no idea really what that meant. I was like, sure, I'm pro-woman, might as well go volunteer. And I remember that day quite clearly. I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. I had my life plan, and I got into the pregnancy center, and suddenly, you know, the women there were so excited to have me, because I was the same age. I was 15. I was the same age as a lot of the women who are coming in looking for help, who are desperate, thinking that abortion was their only option. So they trained me in how to sit down and counsel women in crisis. And from that day on, when I learned the truth about abortion, what was happening, I learned that there was something I could actually do, that I could make an impact, that I could help a mother in crisis, I could save a life. I knew that's what I was called to do.
So, you know, one of the things that I think is really exciting, and I think has helped lead us to where we are on the verge, hopefully, of Dobbs being a watershed decision, is we've been seeing attitudes in America growing more and more pro-life, and particularly young people. You know, people think of young people as more to the left, but on the question of life, it's been a marked movement in the direction of life. And why do you think that is? So you're dealing with students, you're dealing with young people every day. Why do you agree that's happening? And if so, why is it happening?
Yeah, and we actually call ourselves the pro-life generation. I just changed all of our signs for the March of Life this year to say the post-Roe generation. I'm trying to change that, right? But it's interesting, because I was doing an interview with a very liberal reporter earlier today, and the reporter said, you know, anytime I talk about abortion with you people, you always bring up religion. And I said, you know what, to be honest with you, the only people that ever bring up religion with me are people who are pro-abortion who want to attack me. Because when we're on campuses having conversations at Students for Life, which no one has more conversations about abortion than we do. We're always talking about abortion to those who are most targeted by the abortion industry. We're not talking about religion with these young people. It's human rights. It's, do you believe a human being has a right to exist? And do you think that human being should have to be able to live a life free from violence its first 9 months? And then we can talk about religion. We can talk about why is human life valuable. That certainly comes into the conversation. But it doesn't really matter where the student may find themselves, or if they're questioning God's existence, or you know, whether they're atheists, you know, their whole life. We can agree and have that conversation with them about the value of humanity. And I think that's why, Senator, you'll see young people are markedly pro, you know, a lot of liberal bad things that, you know, we're trying to convince them otherwise of. But when it comes to abortion, they see it differently, because it's a human rights battle.
So, and let me ask a related question. You mentioned earlier at the Pregnancy Resource Center counseling young girls. 15-year-old girl comes in, she's pregnant, she's scared, she doesn't know what to do. what counseling, what advice were you telling young girls in that situation?
I think the first thing we always try to understand when you're talking with anyone who's in that moment is to help her see outside of the crisis. It almost becomes like a tunnel vision for her of, I'm pregnant and I have to be not pregnant, because if I'm pregnant, I can't do X, Y, and Z. And so I think it helps to slow down the conversation and to ask her, what is she afraid of? What drove you to this feeling that you feel like you have to pay someone to end the life of your child? Because no woman, if you're ever out in front of a Planned Parenthood or any other abortion facility, no woman is ever enthusiastic about having an abortion.
Sure.
No, I mean, I think the statistic is like 60% of women feel that they're coerced somehow into an abortion.
Yes.
They feel the pressure from partner or society.
Absolutely.
Or I want to talk about this idea of natural rights a little bit too, because this is a conversation that has been lost in our country. We don't talk about the philosophy of the thing a lot. We don't talk about this hierarchy of rights, this life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so, Senator, talk to me a little bit about what can be done at the national level when it comes to what we believe is almost a third founding of our country. We believe that in the course of our history, there have been wrongs committed by men in our country, men in positions of power, but they were in violation of the principles. They were misapplying our founding principles to, race, to gender, to the errors that we have made in our country, and that this is the final error, if you will, that needs to be corrected. What can be done at the national level to recognize natural rights?
Well, listen, I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of persuading people and helping people understand that realizing that every human being, every human life is valuable. Every human life is created in God's image. And every human life deserves to be protected. I mean, if you look through history, through millennia, there has been a recurring source of evil and repression and murder, and that is defining and devaluing some class of human beings as not human. You look at slavery, the original sin of this nation. Slavery was predicated on the notion that people who were African American were somehow less than human. They were property. And once you defined them away from having a right to life, where you would have slave owners who could beat to death and murder other human beings, that all stemmed from the initial claim, this person is not a person. You look at the horrors of the Holocaust, with Nazi Germany exterminating 6 million Jews. That stemmed from the initial premise that the people who were disfavored, in that case it was people who were Jewish, it was people with disabilities, it was homosexuals, it was groups that were gypsies, it was groups who the ruling government declared, you are not human. And when you have the power to say that a human being, a creature of God is not human, that opens the door for all sorts of terrible cascading consequences. If you look at abortion, there's a reason that the advocates of abortion don't refer to an unborn child as an unborn child. Because if it's a child, then we don't kill children. But if you define the child as something else, if it's a lump of cells, well then they're reasoning that you can kill it. If it's not a human, everything else flows from there. And look, you look at I saw a news article a couple of years ago about, I think it was Iceland, where they were bragging that they have no Down syndrome.
They've eliminated Down syndrome. They cured it.
Because any child born with Downs is aborted, and that child has no right to live. I mean,
it's so appalling.
It's horrific.
And that's actually something we have to really take heed of now, because after the Dobbs decision, the hearing in December, and Justice Coney Barrett, she talked about safe haven laws and adoption. Immediately, the left had all of these op-eds about horror stories about adoption and attacking adoption. And then the next week, they started attacking children who may suffer. I have 2 children who have cystic fibrosis. The abortion rate in utero is about 90%, actually higher than Down syndrome. And we've gotten to this point because we've devalued human life. We've taken away saying that human life is intrinsically valuable. We've gotten to this point now in our society where we say, you may suffer one day, therefore it is morally just for me, and I'm doing the right thing if I eliminate you, the sufferer. And that is a talking point we are going to hear for months coming out of the left to justify their extremist abortion positions.
A couple of months ago, I went to a funeral of a good friend of mine who, one of his sons was very severely disabled and was born with very severe disabilities, brain issues that led him to he was unable to walk, unable to talk. He required 24-hour medical care. And when he was born, they said that he would only live a few months or at best a few years. And he lived into his late 20s. But then he did ultimately pass. And it was a funeral. Look, anytime you're having a funeral, especially a funeral of a child, it's difficult for parents to grieve the passing of a child. But it was amazing and uplifting at the same time because the parents, they're strong believers. And the funeral was a celebration of life. They were grateful for every day and every week and every month and every year that they had with Lucas, and they'd been told he wouldn't make it more than a year or two. And so they had nearly 3 decades beyond what they were told to expect. And his brothers spoke at the funeral, and I mean, there was not a dry eye there as they talked about and his brothers are athletes and strong and have all sorts of abilities, but they talked about what they learned from their brother who couldn't communicate, who couldn't run, who couldn't play, but could love.
Yeah.
And the idea that as a society we would say of any human being, your life isn't worthy of being protected. Your life doesn't matter as much as mine. I mean, it is a horrific view, and it is right at the core of this debate over the right to life.
Sure.
It goes back. This brings our conversation in full circle because it goes back to this idea of degrading the dignity and value of any person or treating them as inferior. And this is why our country was founded, right? This is what the American colonists said, listen to the tyrant King George, you are treating us as lesser. You are treating us as subjects and not as human beings. You are depriving us of inherent rights. Therefore, we are going to rebel and set up a government to self-govern, a government of self-governance. And this is why I think what Students for Life is doing, Kristan, what you fight for every day is so important to make sure that we communicate that this is, the final fight for freedom, to make sure that this is the third founding, if you will, because I don't know, I don't want to sound negative here, but I don't know if our country can survive if we do not correct this grievous error.
I agree. Let me ask you, Kristan, it's an amazing thing to think about. What do you think about this year's March for Life possibly being the last one with Roe versus Wade on the books?
Yeah, there is a lot of momentum. A lot of folks, despite all of the DC mandates and COVID protocols and everything, all the hoops we've had to jump through, folks are saying, I have to be there. I have to be there. This is the 49th anniversary that we mourn these children because Roe is not going to see 50. And it's an incredible feeling to be part of a movement that has worked for so long. A lot of the leaders who founded the pro-life movement in 1973 have now since passed. But they were the ones, throughout the 70s, when everyone's like, what is abortion? What are you talking about? Who were relentless in coming to Capitol Hill, to going to their state legislatures. That's what really sets us apart so much from the rest of the world. We have Students for Life allies across the globe who fight, against abortion in all across all these countries. And the thing I keep saying is we have grit. Like, I don't know how to explain American exceptionalism any better than just showing the pro-life movement. We've never been silent. Like, when they told us to sit down and shut up, this was settled law, pro-lifers in America said, hell no. And they've always been those annoying people at the dinner table who brings up the thing you're not
guilty.
Yes.
Totally guilty.
You do not want to invite you to the party. But we always bring that thing up that no one wants to talk about. And that is the reason we're in this moment where we are very much can be marching for the very last anniversary of Roe versus Wade. And we're going to see, I mean, this is going to be in our history books, alongside Dred Scott, alongside Plessy, Roe versus Wade on the ash heap of history, as Vice President Pence says.
Well, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
It matters.
You.
And thank you both for this conversation. I mean, this conversation is not a typical conversation that you hear from elected officials, from rock star activists. Verdict Plus listeners, I'm sure, are delighted to have a peek into the workings of what's happening in government, both from the activism side and the legislative side. So thank you for being here. Verdict Plus members, as you know, if you want more awesome content like this, become a subscriber today. You know what to do. Thank you for being here.